One of the most fascinating things to me with vendor risk management is the liability shifting. Don't get me wrong, I've read thousands of pages of SOC reports, and they hold tremendous value. They're boring to read, but they hold tremendous value. But that value only materializes when it drives meaningful action. And what I mean by that is if you read a SOC report and it gives you, tells you things that you don't really like to hear, but you don't take action on it, you don't say, nope, we're not using that vendor, then what value is it? There isn't much. One of the things I suggest to people is when you look at a SOC report, if you're not really sure what you're looking at the bare minimum, look at the complementary user entity controls. They're like breath mints at a restaurant. They're offered freely, but if you don't take them after you eat, say fish, the aftertaste isn't so great. The CUECs, or the complementary user entity controls, they're the fine print of shared responsibility. It's a polished way of saying, we're secure, but only if you do your part. And often, that part is the riskiest. For example, let's look at user access. I read countless SOC reports, and they'll say things like, we provide user accounts for you to manage, right? So your organization, maybe you have 10 user accounts. They're providing you user accounts in a system. They're providing minimum password requirements, but that company cannot make sure that your employees don't write passwords down on paper. That company can't be responsible for maybe business continuity. If that company goes under and, tanks, well, your business is still reliant on its services. So it's up to you to figure out how you're going to do your own business continuity. And those are all called out in the CUEC section. So it's important for you to look at a SOC report, look at those CUECs, and make sure that your organization has controls in place to manage those. Another thing that I find interesting is around big cloud vendors. So let's zoom out a little bit. Your vendor will often say things in a SOC report like, we use AWS. They're really big and they have lots of security. And we review their SOC report every year. Well, guess what? AWS has the same language, or Azure, or GCP, whatever the case is. Your fourth party, they're saying, hey, go back to our customer. Even though we, say AWS, is providing all these great controls, your vendor or their customer has to make sure it's doing its due diligence as well. And so you have these controls that potentially in a SOC report you're reading called complementary subservice organization controls, or CSOCs. Sometimes it's buried in assumptions, but either way, your vendor is relying on their vendor. And guess what? You are still liable for your customers. So, what do you do about this perception of risk coverage? Number one, make sure your policies and controls actively support the user side responsibilities outlined in a SOC report. The CUECs, make sure you're covered. If the SOC report, this would be number two, if the SOC report or other due diligence doesn't address specific areas of concern from your business, have a conversation with your vendor. So if you look at a SOC report and it's really fuzzy and you don't get it, call your vendor and ask the questions that you need to feel comfortable with using them. And then number three, do something about it. If a partner's assumptions don't align with your risk appetite, walk away. It's far easier to explain to an executive why you declined a partnership than to help them explain to a client why that partner disrupted their business. In the end, it's not a vendor who gets breached. It's the one who believed the coverage was complete, and that's you. So again, if you're not overly familiar with SOC reports, or even if you are, dial into those CUECs, dial into the CSOCs, and get intimately familiar with those. It will help you a great deal.